Hi, I'm Dr. Sam Hazledine, founder of MedWorld. Today, I am going to be interviewing Dr. Angela Lim. Now, Angela is the 2017 finalist for Young New Zealander of the Year. She's a paediatric doctor, and she is now also the CEO and co-founder of Clearhead, which is New Zealand's first AI-driven diagnostic and triage platform for mental health and well-being. Today, we're going to be having a conversation and exploring how technology can deliver transformative health outcomes. So I'm really looking forward to it. Welcome, Angela.
Thanks for having me, Sam.
It's great to have you here. Let's dive straight on in. Tell me, firstly, how did your career get to this point? You know, a lot of doctors take a very, medicine is a pretty prescribed path, and you've decided to go in a different direction. So tell me how you got here.
Yeah, I think that there will be a cohort of doctors listening to your podcast, which might kind of feel like sort of the treadmill that they're on is not something that they want to continue on. They might be more junior and trying to figure out like what's a specialty that they're interested in. And so I guess like I hope by sharing my story, just give you faith that like, you know, your medical degree in itself is valuable, even if you don't sort of continue ahead with just purely a clinical practice. So my journey started when I sort of applied for medical school as a postgraduate. And I got in, and I think within the first year of medical school, I had massive doubts about whether this was something that I wanted to move forward with. I think I felt like a lot of medical school was very rote learning, and it was not the best way my brain applied. And I was someone that I think over the next few years of medical school realized that I actually really love more strategic stuff, much more around thinking about innovation and the role of innovation in healthcare, and especially technology. I still remember sort of thinking about how archaic it was to use a pager, you know, and in sort of when I graduated and was a junior doctor. And that was not very long ago. That was only a few years ago. And I'm pretty sure the doctors are still using pages. So I think sort of like, I guess that uncertainty about whether clinical medicine was for me sort of really started quite in the early days of medical school. So because of that, I was constantly searching for, well, what else could make me feel more confident about my place in the world. But I also still really love health and wanting to help people. So my first foray was actually in sort of governance positions around sort of health IT projects that were being rolled out by the Ministry of Health. And I was actually only 21 when I sat on my first board. And I think they were really just interested in the perspective of someone who was connected well into the community, but also was practicing clinically in the future. And so that was my first taste and my journey, I guess, of the 10 plus years in technology. And then I sort of went into pediatrics training, and I really loved it. But again, just felt like what drove me was like, how can I make an impact at scale? And that sort of one-to-one relationship is very special, but there's only like 24 hours in a day, and there's only so many patients I could see. So basically, at the start of 2018, I kind of just came to sort of a self-reflection period, as you do during, you know, sort of those New Year resolution times. And I was kind of going, I'm very lucky. I have a job I love. It pays me well. You know, I own my own home. I have good family and friend support around me. And I just felt like I was coasting at the age of 28. And that was, I was like, well, if I don't sort of like get out of the treadmill now, I never will. So that's how I sort of started Clearhead, was just this need to kind of apply my skills and what I've learned at a larger level. And I'm happy to talk about what Clearhead is as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting one, I think, that you know, some people, you know, from a purpose perspective, you know, I do a lot of work in burnout, and I think one of the, not I think, but, you know, research shows one of the biggest protective factors against burnout is that purpose. And it's a really interesting perspective to consider whether you gain purpose in a one-to-one setting or in a one-to-many scale setting. And I think, the really good practitioners of medicine, they get a lot of purpose from the one-to-one. They love those interactions. They get a lot of meaning from it. They're the doctors, they're the magic doctors who, the patients love and have a really positive impact. And then there are some people like you yourself, you mentioned, I'm the same, that didn't feel like where I wanted, it just didn't feel where I was drawn to have an impact. And so, for me, it was also picking a one-to-many platform, which is, the med world, which is, the many other doctors. Thought that was an interesting perspective.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you. I mean, the reality is I work longer hours now running Clearhead than I did when I was a doctor. I definitely also don't get paid as much as I was when I was a doctor. But I definitely feel richer in my life and I think, ultimately, for me, I guess it's just that, have you heard of the term ikigai? No? It's a Japanese term, but again, very much in relation to what you talked about purpose, which is just that melding of what is it that you love to do? What is it that you're really good at? What is it that the world needs what you're good at, and then what they're willing to pay you for. So these four intersections is really the beauty of what you're trying to search. And and as a doctor, I guess I technically ticked all of them, but I felt that through Clearhead, I applied more of my natural strengths and therefore provided a more unique value to the problems in the world than I could as a doctor. Because I felt very replaceable as a doctor. I just felt like another cog in the machine. Not that cog wasn't important, it just didn't feel like I was using the best of my abilities.
Yeah, interesting. Did it take, because I remember when I, went out and started MedRecruit originally and then MedWorld, and people were like, oh, it was so brave to, leave, stop practicing all this time. And I didn't look at it that way. I was like, I was just doing what I wanted to do where I thought I could have an impact. Yes. Did it take courage for you to make that decision, or was it just a natural progression in terms of, leaning into what you love, what you're good at, your skill set?
Yeah, completely had the same experience as you. I still have people, other doctors, say to me, oh, you're so brave for leaving. And actually, I felt like I would have to be braver to stay, because I would have to be able to sit with potential regrets, right? Because there was so much of I wanted to explore that I couldn't explore through practicing medicine. So I felt it was scarier to stay, actually, and potentially live with that regret. So for me, it was just, like you said, a natural progression. It was the same as well. It wasn't that I always knew clinical medicine wasn't forever, but I didn't have an inkling of, but what would the alternative be? And I think that's also probably quite a few of your listeners would be experiencing. It's okay, well, I'm not completely satisfied as a doctor, but what else can I do? I've been shoehorned into this thing. And so, I deliberately tried to broaden my skill sets and experience in addition to medicine. And that would be my advice if you're listening and that's something you're curious about. Just go dabble in other things on the side as well.
I agree. And doing other things, once a doctor, you're always a doctor. People say you're leaving, and I say you never actually leave. No. You just start to become a doctor in a different way, don't you?
That's right.
But let's get on to Clearhead. Tell me, what is Clearhead? Yeah.
So basically, I wanted to solve this really cool issue, which is that I felt that the demand for healthcare far outstrips the supply of human health professionals available. We just can't train enough to meet that need, and it's also incredibly expensive to train that very highly skilled workforce. And I just felt that a lot of the way that we worked, potentially some of it could automate that sort of boring, repetitive stuff, and therefore actually empower the individual to actually make better care decisions in the community. But you can't just sort of say to patients, it's like, oh, you didn't make that good decision, or you didn't take your medication, or, like when we never actually have the time to actually improve their health literacy. So those were like the two problems I wanted to marry up with technology. So we chose to work on mental health, even though this sort of problem around access exists within all of healthcare. And the reason for that is because in New Zealand, about 95% of our public mental health funding actually goes to only 5% of the population that requires that support. And so you sort of see that disparity in other parts of healthcare, but I've never seen it as acutely bad as in mental health. So I thought to myself in 2018, if I worked in that space, it had the biggest potential to make a difference. So this was, I worked on mental health before it is sexy, which it is now. Everybody wants to solve mental health. So we essentially said, look, what is missing in a health system that we can create so that people who can't get onto the system can at least have an alternative through Clearhead. And so essentially what we've built is a digital triaging system that allows the individual to come on much earlier because there's less stigma, and it's also much more scalable. And then the system triages them in three ways. Either that they are in crisis and need to speak to someone immediately, whether they are just having a very severe symptom base or complex mental health history, and therefore should still see a clinician, but maybe not right now. And then the third larger cohort, which is more sort of your mild to moderate and who needs a bit of support, just wants to be guided, just want to improve their mental health literacy, want to self-manage, can they do that as well? So you start that journey with this digital triage system that we've created, like, I guess, the equivalent of an AI therapist. We do use a bit of artificial intelligence to help with the triaging. And then for those that need to see a clinician, we've actually built New Zealand's largest mental health therapist marketplace. And the biggest difference with our system is it's automating that coordination of care. So we have the real-time availability of these clinicians. And just to maybe give you an example of what that means in real life, one of our users sort of came on at and made a request for therapy at 11 p.m. on a Saturday for an appointment at 2 p.m. on a Sunday. And that whole process was basically confirmed by the therapist in the morning and seen in the afternoon. So when someone reached out for help to when they got seen to when we got invoiced and billed for the care delivered was 14 hours, but not a middle person like a case manager or a receptionist like having to coordinate that care during an after hours situation. And that person wasn't sort of like in distress or anything. He was just someone who needed help. And so I think we were very proud to be able to deliver a positive experience in the real world and you not having to jump through many hoops because you're in crisis. And then finally, obviously, just to kind of make sure that the system is always learning and the reasons in which people come to you will evolve. And so how do you also use data analytics to continue to make the system relevant and personalized to the individual's needs? So that's kind of, I guess, a snapshot of what Clearhead is and sort of one integrated platform.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting application of technology to augment humans. What are, I guess, in terms of that, we have had this discussion before, the mythical AI doctor has been just around the corner for the last 20 years and hasn't actually quite come to fruition, yet, but it's always just around the corner. What are the challenges that you've faced in terms of applying technology in the health space?
Yeah, so the main thing around applying technology like this in healthcare is safety is paramount. So for example, if you were going to say like, oh, I think that's a great idea, I'm going to just go get a off the box, out of the shelf kind of solution where there's a chat bot and an AI algorithm, and I'll just put it together and I'll create what Clearhead has done. Like, it's really hard because these out-of-the-box stuff are not trained in domain-specific, natural language. And so what that means is like if someone sort of uses this sort of out-of-the-box solution you put together, and they say, for example, I'm so happy that all my problems are going to go away because I'm going to kill myself. These out-of-the-box solution actually respond back with, that's great, you should go ahead with it. And so these safety ring fences don't exist, and you need to take the time to think about what are all the different ways in which you would, allocate a human being's response. And then if you think about the complexity of all the different variables that exist around why you make the triaging decisions that you do. As a human clinicians, you'll have to almost also program a similar knowledge map into the AI. So it sounds like a great idea, but it just takes time to train the right model, constantly put the safety checks in place and stuff like that.
Has that challenge been bigger than you thought going into it?
Yes, in the sense that because we allow the users to come onto our system and say anything, if, for example, someone comes onto our system and says I'm so anxious because of climate change, in order for the system to be smart, it needs to then understand that the main issue here is the anxiety, but also the scenario which they're anxious about, which is climate change. So how do I help the individual, one, reduce the symptomatic distress that comes from the anxiety, but also help them with understanding how they can work through the specific cause in which they have come to this point. And so it's almost that infinite the infinite amount in which people can come to you for a particular problem that's the hardest, I find.
Yeah, okay. And do you see, obviously AI as a part of that solution, but as I said, the AI doctor's been around the corner for a while. Do you think we're close to AI starting to be able to behave like a human in terms of this interaction, or is it more a triage system for quite a long time, do you think?
To be honest, I think, and we talked about it in the last call, was like IBM tried, spent 10 years, spent $1 billion, and they still haven't succeeded. And they also, wasn't like sort of general AI it was also focused in sort of oncology. So they did pick a focus area and was still not very successful. So look, the attempts of what we're trying to do is not guaranteed. And my hypothesis is that we're still at least 2 to 3 years away from achieving that.
Yeah, okay, cool. Where obviously you picked this as a challenge. Where else do you see opportunities in healthcare for technology to play a bigger role than it's playing right now?
So one of the things that we could tangibly improve was that coordination of care stuff. So I just gave you a very real example from a patient's experience, but also what that then translates as in New Zealand, we have about, on average, a 3-month wait list at the moment if you use the public system for support. And on our system, it's like less than a week. So these are the ways in which I don't need incredible applications of almost R&D type of technology to be able to make a difference. But the challenge in this case is having to be able to almost build an end-to-end system in which you think about how does, if for example, you're not able to work with the public system, which you often won't because they're very risk adverse and only want to work with the same people who have sort of 20 years established track record, then you have to think about all the ways in which that pathway closes. So in the sense that you have to think about if you come up with a great idea, how do you get it in front of the people that would use the tool that you're building? So that's one challenge. The second is then how do you attract, so for example, in our case, building the large network, and we've talked about it, Sam, around MedRecruit, how you were successful in recruiting the clinicians that you do. It's how do you build that marketplace? How do you reach out to these clinicians who are in some ways very comfortable with the status quo and how they work? And then in our case, how do you convince them to change some of the way that they behave, so that you enable these processes to happen? And then the final loop is who's going to pay for it. So I mean, if we're so not, as consumers, especially in Australasia, we're not used to paying for healthcare. So if they're not paying for it, who is paying for it? And have you set that out as well? So I think the thing that people might have some naivety around, and this is what I've learned over the 10 years sitting on these governance boards, is like, it's not just like introducing a great tool. It's very much about understanding what's the model of care that you're going to change, what's the incentive models you have to put in place so that, sort of you do see that change in behavior. What are all the unintended consequences of introducing a system like this? Are you just pushing the problem from one area to another area, and all those kind of stuff. And then, of course, again, we talked about in healthcare, it's like, how do you make sure that you minimize any harm caused, and that you're tracking to make sure that what you've done creates value and is clinically effective as well.
Got a lot to consider, don't you?
Yeah, it's not easy. But I mean, we talked about this, Sam, like, it's like, I think there's a bit of a glamorization of entrepreneurship. And I think you and I do it because we just generally would not be able to sleep if we don't. But like, it's not a path that I would recommend for anyone just, wanting to have it's not a stroll in the park, I think is what I'm trying to say.
No. Yeah, you say couldn't sleep without, but can't sleep doing it either. So that's problematic. I don't know if you find that, but that's probably another discussion. No, that's right. It's interesting, but I think the interesting piece is when you find what you're passionate about and what you're on purpose. I mean, I was the same when I started out. I was working a lot more hours than I did as a junior doctor, but it was almost like that purpose was protective because I was so passionate about it. Until it wasn't. And I was sort of, just 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. I did that for 5 or 7 years. And then I did start noticing that I wasn't enjoying it as much. And I was just dragging myself. And, burnout can still happen, I think, even when you're on purpose.
100%. Yeah. And I mean, I'm sort of like going through it a little bit at the moment. Because we're sort of getting to a point where we need to kind of raise a bit more capital. And I was saying to you, Sam, that this takes up quite a bit of time, but also like the business as usual stuff of running the business still has to occur. And so I was really working a lot with the BAU stuff, and then now I've got to throw another piece of thing on my plate, and it didn't feel like there was an end in sight, and I was going to take a break, and that normally recharges me, but then lockdown happened, and so my break didn't happen, and so I was self-aware enough to know I needed a break, but then, like things outside of my control prevented it from happening. And so one of the things that I've been doing, I don't know if you've heard of it, is called revenge procrastination. Have you heard of that one?
Revenge procrastination.
Yes.
No, I haven't. Tell me about revenge.
It just basically means that, so I also know that I need my sleep, but I think I was feeling like I'm working all the time and I don't have any time to do the leisure stuff, either catching up with friends or watching a TV show or reading a book. And so I would get to a point where I'm just going to make it happen. And so I would work these long hours, and then I would binge watch hours of shows, and then I would go to bed at 1 a.m. instead of 10 p.m. And that's what they call revenge procrastination. Is you almost need a bit of that procrastination in your life. You didn't get it because you're working so hard. So you're sacrificing sleep, which is not great. And so how do you, again build that self-awareness and be okay, cool, I'll let it run for a couple of days, but then I can't let it go any further than that. And so yes, I completely agree with you that you can be incredibly purposeful and not want to change what you're doing in terms of this purpose, but still kind of feel the edges of burnout when you're working too hard for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Does the revenge procrastination work? Because there are all sorts of far more wholesome type advice when it comes to burnout, but that sounds quite fun. So it doesn't work.
um, I think that what I was looking for was things that I couldn't multitask on, if that makes sense. So, so for example, going for runs is really great because I don't, like when I'm running, I can't juggle replying an email at the same time.
Yeah.
But then because I have been working quite late, I couldn't really do it during the weekdays. So I definitely exercise during the weekends. And so I find that I do these revenge procrastination, and it's kind of a new thing. It's just a recent stress of the last week or two. But I would do that in the weekdays because I don't really want to go out for a run when it's really late at night. So the only thing I could really do to take my mind off things was to watch TV. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting. The TV does get a bad rap, but for the entrepreneur, sometimes it's the only way to turn off the mind.
Yeah, exactly.
Meditation's helpful. But what surprised you in this journey? I mean, it's been an eventful journey so far.
Yeah.
What surprised you about it?
I'm going to share a negative one, which is like, I think I genuinely believe that if you're in healthcare, you're here for very predominantly altruistic reasons. And as a doctor, you will mainly just meet other clinicians who mostly are doing it because they want to help patients, not because they want to make lots of money. And then when I think I moved into the entrepreneurship space, and like I said, was trying to be a part of the system, I learned quickly that there were a lot of entrenched interests that had no motivation to collaborate with you or change the way that they work, because the way the status quo works means that they make lots of money, and to change will mean that they will make less money, even though it will be a lot better for the patient. So I think that was the thing I learned that surprised me the most, was that even if the better solution for the patient exists, it's very hard to bring that across because there are a lot of invested interest in the status quo.
That's a really interesting point, isn't it? And there's all sorts of research that shows that it's hard for people to do things that go against what they perceive as their best interests.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's a challenge in any industry, including ours in medicine. It sometimes means that we're quite slow moving and slow to adapt. Would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I would almost say that it's a shock because we're clinicians. Often most clinicians work 2 to 3 hours outside of what they would get paid either as a salary or what's billable for them. Because it just has to be done. And so we stay on, we come in early to prep for the patient list, we stay on to make sure we finish the discharge summary, even though technically it's outside our working hours. And we put in that goodwill because ultimately we're not doing it for ourselves. We don't get any benefit for doing that. We're doing it because the patient benefits. And then I think that it was a surprise for me to kind of see that didn't translate, that same mentality didn't translate in the business world for sort of the healthcare operations that exist.
Yeah, right. And so you're talking not dealing with doctors, you're dealing with more organizations.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think doctors work very hard, and other health professionals do as well.
Yeah, and I think, I think it's interesting. As almost no one becomes a doctor, for the money, and everyone goes in there because they do want to have an impact in whatever way, and
Yes.
some of us find different ways to do that. But the 6 years in medical school and then the multiple years as junior doctor, that is just entrained in you. That to put your interests second, and that's problematic sometimes when it comes to the burnout.
That's right.
But it does mean that we do put the patient and patient care first. And I personally think it's really important, that doctors are in leadership positions, within hospitals, in organisations. I think like with what you're doing in Clearhead, a technologist could lead an organisation like that, but I personally have a lot more faith in an organisation that's led by a doctor. The work I'm doing in MedWorld, technically it could be done by someone else, but I don't think the doctors would trust non-doctors, trying to build out a community around medicine. So I think it does highlight the importance, anyone listening as well, of just why we need doctors actually stepping into those leadership positions, because generally our interests are more altruistic.
That's right. Yeah. And look, I think ultimately, and we talked about this, is like, if I can reduce the load coming to you because patients are more effectively triaged, they are supported to, self-manage in the community, then you're going to enjoy your job better, because you're not asked to do more with less. You're going to just get the ones that really need to see you. And I guess that's my attempt of like managing and improving the burnout of our community, right? Because I think that I would just say it, I would say it's the abuse of our goodwill. And health systems all around the world, not just public mental health, not just public systems, rely on doctors going above and beyond. But if we kind of all start to say, no, we won't do it, the system will fail. So I think this is my attempt of making sure that the system doesn't fail by ensuring we build systems in place that reduces us losing our most important resource, which is our health professionals.
Absolutely. I mean, as you said early on, demand in healthcare has and probably always will, to some extent, be greater than the supply. And I think that's a really good point you make, that healthcare professionals, their good intent gets used against them by saying, the solution is work you harder.
Yeah.
And I think with what you're doing, and I think, this is where technology does play a role, is how can technology strip away the things that the healthcare professionals, the doctors don't have to do, so they can do what they and only they can do, which is, is treat that patient in front of them and have that individual connection. And I think, to me, that's where technology sits in healthcare, is it's an augmentation to the people's work, as opposed to, it's certainly not a replacement.
No, I would never say it's a replacement.
Yeah. So, Angela, I mean, you're still pretty young and you've got a wee way to go, but you're not, but if you could go back in time and give your 18-year-old self, when you first joined that board, 3 pieces of advice, what would you say are the 3 most important things that you would tell that young, up-and-coming doctor to have a great life?
Yeah, one is be patient and trust that process. I think that, we live in a world where we want results immediately. Good things take time, so that's one. The second is to deal with the uncertainty, or more specifically, sit with the uncertainty. There will be some things in life you can control, and then there are a lot of things in life you can't. So know how to differentiate those 2 things and work on the things you can control, and then accept the things that you can't, and that will give you peace. And then the third thing is, just network. Like, your network says everything. A lot of my success personally, professionally, and through Clearhead, in some ways has been seeded by a network that I've made sometime in my life. And for that, I'm incredibly grateful for the people who supported us. So it's worth investing in your relationships.
3 great pieces of advice. And just finally, how would you like to be remembered?
Well, if I'm not being too narcissistic saying this, but I would love to be remembered for transforming the health system globally in terms of improving the way people access care. Sounds like
a worthy challenge to be working towards, I think. I think that's great. Look, Angela, is there anything else that you'd want to say to any doctors who are listening at the moment?
No, just I hope that me sharing my story gives you faith that you can carve your own path. Mine is very unusual for a typical doctor. And and I'm still really happy, really successful in what I've defined success to be. And I hope you find yours. And and if you're in New Zealand and you need to refer your patients on to get better mental health support, you can look at Clearhead.
There you go. Good entrepreneurial plug there. I like that. I like that. Look, I think it's great advice, and there are a lot of doctors, practicing medicine is absolutely what they want to do, and for some, it's not. They find that it's not quite what they want to do, and I have a belief that if you're just standing still, like if you're looking down a corridor, standing still, you can't see what doors are open, you can't see what's through those doors. Sometimes you just got to have that faith and start walking. And then you'll see the doors that are open, and you'll see which ones you want to go through, and you may go through some and decide you didn't want to go through that door. But a lot of decisions we make in life, some of them are one-way doors, but most of them are two-way doors, and that for me has been really helpful in just terms of just relaxing. You can make a decision, and then it can be the wrong decision.
Yeah, agree. Some of the things I've been able to do, I could never even imagine. But it was, like you said, Sam, taking that first step, walking through that first door, and then seeing the next door that you would never have seen if you didn't go through the first door to start with. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, I think that's a great takeaway from today. So thank you, Angela. I really appreciate your time. I know you're busy. I asked before this interview, anyone listening, I asked her before if she was still practicing medicine. She just laughed in my face. She's like, there's no time. I haven't got no time for that at the moment. And I can understand why. But look, I think, it's great, this path you've taken. And it's really, I think the challenge you're trying to solve is very worthy. And this augmentation of our healthcare system is just so important if we want to try and increase the supply side, because we know that demand is ever increasing.
Thank you, Sam, for having me. It's been a pleasure to chat with you.
And great to talk. And to everyone, thanks for listening.